Hello, my friends. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm recording this in February, and it's the middle part of the school year. And that middle part of the school year between January and March is an important chunk of time where there's a big focus on mastering academics of the school year. And it can also be a time that's known as the mid-year slump. So we'll be talking about the mid-year slump, what it is, and how to get kids through it. And my guest today is Michelle Porjes. She is a licensed educational psychologist, a credentialed school psychologist in the state of California, and a Child Nexus professional member. She specializes in executive functioning coaching, and she helps experienced educators establish tutoring and educational support services that help kids thrive. We are also going to talk about executive functioning and the big book of tools she developed to support students. There's a lot to pack into one episode, so be sure to check out the show notes if you want to go a little deeper on any of those topics, including a blog post on ways to address the mid-year slump. Let's jump in.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Hi, Michelle, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Good morning.
It is so great to have you here. You know, I was thinking about the fact that we have not done like a webcast or anything, any kind of virtual event since before COVID, it seems. We did that one on executive functioning.
We did. I remember that.
Yes. And so much has changed since then. And I knew that I wanted to have you back to talk about a number of different things. But, right now we're recording this in February. It just turned February. And January to March is that mid-year slump time. And I was reading your blog post, which is absolutely fabulous. And I will definitely direct our listeners to that blog post. But you talk about the mid-year slump, which we're in right now. Can you talk to our listeners about what exactly that is? And then we'll kind of go into a little bit more.
Yeah. The mid-year slump is really interesting. We get off of November and December where there's a lot of joy and there's holidays and there's decorations and excitement and cooking and get-togethers. And certainly even this year with COVID, things are not the same, but they're better than they were a year ago. And there's just a lot of optimism and joy. And then we get into January. And January, February, and March is what we refer to as the mid-year slump, where for many places, there's not a lot of days off. And look, we all look forward to days off. Whether we're an adult or a kid, we look forward to having vacations. The weather tends to be colder. It tends to get darker earlier. And it doesn't feel as optimistic as it feels at other times. And it can often feel like the mid-year slump, where you just don't have the same energy to do what you want to do. And it affects us as adults, even the more so children. They've come off a winter break. They're basically being told, okay, now it's time to learn. Now we're really fourth graders. Now we're really eighth graders. Let's dig in. And for a child, that can feel a little overwhelming.
And I can see that. And not only overwhelming, but it seems like that would also decrease their motivation. They need this high level of motivation to stay engaged and to work hard. And it seems that this mid-year slump would impact that as well.
Exactly. It impacts motivation. It impacts desire. It impacts their overall mood and their happiness, right? If they have homework and they're not able to go outside as much and it was raining and they didn't get much recess and it's cold and it's dark, impacts everything.
Absolutely. And you really provide some great ideas, and you provide 5 ways to beat the mid-year slump, which I think is going to be so helpful to parents and for educators. And I would love for you to give us 3 of those. I'm going to have everyone go to your website to get the other 2, but if you can talk about kind of 3 ways that we can help students beat the mid-year slump, that would be great.
Absolutely. So one of my favorite things to do, which I think is really important when there's an issue, is to out it. And the easiest way to out it is to name it. You know what, guys? We're in the mid-year slump. Again, this is for an educator or a parent, anybody. Like, name it and describe it. It's so much easier to tackle a problem when you don't hide from it and you give it a name and you talk about what it means and you sort of normalize it. And sometimes it's important to share a story, whether you're a teacher or a parent, like, and this is what it felt like to me when I was 11. It was January, and it was cold, and I wasn't really into school and all that. So that's one of the things to start with, is naming it, describing it. The other thing is, the next part of that is having a plan to address the mid-year slump. And that involves conscious thought. So we can name it, we can describe it, but that doesn't make it feel any better, right? That just makes it feel cold and dark, and there's a lot of homework, and I'm not excited, and spring seems really far away. But if we have a plan to address it, that's really important. And sometimes a plan can be little things to look forward to. So I'll give you an example. We did mac and cheese night last night in my house. Brought in 3 different mac and cheese boxes. Okay, it wasn't the healthiest. And we compared them. And like, what a just a little fun way to do something. We talked about it in the weekend, and it was just a way to get over a Monday, right? So if we have a plan, like maybe there's an outing, or actually there's now a new after school club that we haven't tried. Let's go ahead and try that. Or if you're in your classroom, break out some new curriculum. That's kind of exciting for kids. So that's the second thing. The other thing to do is, instead of hiding from the stuff that make the mid-year slump difficult, the cold weather, the rain, the snow, the darkness, tackle it. And go and find activities that have to do with all these kinds of things. And nowadays with Google, all we need to do is Google something that says, what are some fun winter experiments? What's a fun activity to do in the dark? And what that does is that helps bring some joy where it's really hard to find. So those are my top 3.
And that's really important for parents and educators listening, because I love that you started with naming it. It's like, name it to tame it, because that also validates the child's experience that this is hard. And I love that you talked about kind of transitioning from the holidays back into school. And that in and of itself can be difficult, because you've had all these celebrations, you've spent time with family, you didn't have any schoolwork, and now you have to kind of re-engage in that academic world. And that can be tough, particularly for kids who struggle with learning. And the holidays have been a nice break from their struggles and things that are harder for them. And so providing them with some of these activities that you describe allow them to experience some joy within their day, on the weekend, particularly when they have to work really hard.
Exactly. And here's the interesting thing with the mid-year slump. It actually coincides where expectations for learning have often increased. So I had a colleague I work with who said everybody learns in January, February, March. And that's true. So that's a big learning time. So the learning expectations have increased. The work pace may have increased. Homework may have increased. And at the same time, I'm not excited about being in school. At the same time, the family is not excited about, we can't spend time outside. The teachers are feeling that there's such a big expectation for them, and there's not a lot of breaks there. So there's a little bit of disconnect, what happens there. So when you out it, and when you out it as a family, not just to the kid, or you out it as an educator to the classroom, you're normalizing it. And one of the best things to do is not keep it to yourself, is to put it out there and say, okay, this is what it is. And let's come up with this plan of how to take this on. And even say, there are big expectations of learning in January, February, March. But that doesn't mean we can't have these sparkle moments. That doesn't mean we can't have these diamonds, to make sure that we're really enjoying time as well.
And the expectations is an important piece, because it seems that students are learning a lot of material And it seems like now what you're describing is kind of this move to applying what it is that they've learned, and the demands have increased in terms of expectations. And that is so important.
Exactly. And then what we need to think about, like you and I and people that serve kids who struggle or diverse learners, is how much harder all of this is on diverse learners, on the parents of diverse learners, and on the educators of diverse learners. So it's just really important to be thinking about this all the time. And I would even say to be planning for it. So even in September, when I was administrator in school, I used to do Rhythm of the Year. And I spent a lot of time talking with teachers and teaching assistants about the rhythm of the year and what September looks like. And it's much different than what November looks like, much different than what February looks like or May looks like. So there is a rhythm to the year. And it's important to have this discussion as part of the rhythm of the year.
Mm-hmm. And it's also good to kind of have kids know what the expectations are in terms of coming up. I know that for my kids, before we took a break for the holidays, we knew what was coming up. I knew that my daughter was going to have a science fair and that my son was going to have a book report. And so we could have in our minds that this is something that was going to take place. And that helps with planning, because then we can start thinking about it. We can read the book. We don't have to work on it over the holidays, but we kind of know what we're going to do. We can have the idea. What are you going to do for your science project? And that helps to alleviate some of the stress during this mid-year slump period, because you've already kind of at least thought about some of these things before. And even when kids start in January, if they know what they have to do, parents helping with breaking that big project, the book report, the science fair, into smaller chunks will be really helpful, particularly, as you mentioned, to our diverse learners.
Well, and just to dovetail into executive functioning, which we know I always love to talk about,
yes,
is one of the best things to do throughout the year, but certainly in the mid-year slump, is to calendar and to make sure that that calendar represents January, February, and March. Here's what it looks like. Because one of the things that we see generally with children is they don't track time well, right? They're waiting for recess. Recess feels short. We didn't get any recess. It's shortened recess. The hour spelling feels incredibly long. Homework feels, non-ending. But if we calendar things, both in terms of what does a month look like, what does a week look like, and even in terms of a daily checklist, it makes things more doable. And how much more so this is needed at this point, where it feels like homework may have increased. And the truth is it has. With many of my clients, they're in a big homework time. January, February is a big homework time. Some of it is spring breaks are in March, and teachers are trying to get in as much as they can. But if we can use the calendaring system to help kids see, here's where we're at, here's where we were, here's where we're going. And then we can start to, around now, say, guess what? It's 28 days and it's spring break. Guess what? 6 weeks until we have 2 weeks off. Kids can absorb it much better.
Mm-hmm. And is it important to have a visual calendar? Because oftentimes, we have these digital calendars, we have Google calendars, but I often feel that it's helpful to have a visual calendar that kids can look at, particularly the younger kids, that they can see it, they can count the days, they can put a check or an X when that project is done, that day is over with, and they have a visual representation of what's happening and what's coming up.
100%. I really prefer, as kids are learning, kids and people with executive functioning issues do not have a great concept of what a month is, or even what a week is. And one could say what a day or what an hour is. But for a month, there's a learning opportunity. So until kids really understand what a month is, a whiteboard calendar is great because you're constructing time. You're writing out the dates. Kids do not automatically know what that means. They may have seen it in school, but when you see it in school, you're a passive person. When you make the calendar at home, you're an active participant. So making that calendar and writing things down there, it's not so much for, okay, now you're going to remember to do your homework, right? The test is here, but it's to experience how time passes, to look at when are the birthdays, when are the soccer practices, when are the outings that you're going to do. It's really important to be able to see time in that respect. And I have worked with teenagers on that who tell me, I don't have anything to put on the calendar. That's the first answer. I don't need it. I don't have anything to put. And when we dive in, there are things to put on the calendar. So absolutely visual. Every child's workspace, or as I like to call it, a command center, should have a monthly calendar, along with some other things.
And you mentioned executive functioning, and the calendar is a really good tool for managing a lot of the things that we think about when we think about executive functioning, planning. And you talk a lot about executive functioning. A lot of your work focuses on executive functioning. We talk about it a great deal on this podcast because it's so important for so many aspects of a child's life. And you created a pocket guide of tools that I think is just brilliant. Can you talk about what that is? Because again, we're talking about visualizations and how important they are for anchoring kids. And I think that your pocket guide of tools is a great example of that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for talking about this. So every educator, just like every learner, is going to construct what executive functioning means to them and how they want to understand it. There's no one way to do executive functioning. And we know that, and that's why you can have 10 people who specialize in it, and each person can have a different aspect of it, and it can all be useful. So none of us own this in terms of executive functioning. So what I did was I put together about 3 years ago, I sat down over a period of 6 or 8 months and said, okay, what do I want to highlight in executive functioning? What's important from my perspective? What's my angle? And my angle is a couple of things. How do you manage your stuff, time, and information? And how do you balance your school life with your social life? And how do you become efficient? So I talk a lot with kids about how to become efficient because that's my angle. Like, look, let's get you away from working out and playing. But to do this, you got to use certain tools. So as I began to develop this and create handouts and create, work for kids, it became something that I was like, these are tools, right? So I often say to people, I have tools, and the tools don't look like a wrench and a hammer and a screwdriver, but they were sort of 2D. They were flat. And I thought, okay, that's good. I can teach them the tools, but I've got to bring some life to them. So I started to say, let me chisel things down in terms of what are the key points. And whenever you're an educator or you're developing materials, you know that every time you look at it, you could change it a little bit more. So eventually I had to stop sort of chiseling. And then it became, well, how do I want to get this out to people? And how do I want to make this that's unique, but unique to me? But I always had an eye on the idea that it's not about having a piece of paper, or as mine is like a flip chart, and just putting on a kid's desk. That's not going to be used, but it's about a tool of communication. So what do I mean by that? I mean that it's something that a kid can use and the educator or the specialist who's working with the kid can use. It's something that a kid can have, but a parent can easily access. So I tried to ground it down to usable words, to words that everybody would understand. And then it became, who can put this thing together, right? So I had in my mind, when you go to like a restaurant sometimes, there's like a dessert menu or a drink menu or appetizer menu. It's sort of like a flip chart on sort of a wire ring. And I was like, I want this. I haven't seen this. This is what I want. And it took some diving in on the internet to find. I spoke with a company to make it also affordable. Anytime you want to do something a little different. And it basically is a tabletop flip chart. And I put it together, and the first run of it is finishing up, and I'm going to do a second run. And basically what I did was I highlighted all the things that I teach in my 6 to 8 hours of when I really construct and teach executive functioning to educators, parents, and children. But I highlighted the key aspects. And I put it down there in a way that I thought would allow people to be like, oh, yeah, oh, I remember that. Or I can look at this page and just get something to have me connect to that idea. And I have given it out to all of my clients with good feedback. And I have sold them along with the big book of tools, which is digital. And I'm very proud of this creation. And I knew that you needed to know about it because you're all about efficiency and getting the word out in a variety of areas. And I'm so thankful for this group and all the people that are part of it as well.
Absolutely. And so how do you see children, and then we'll talk about parents next, using this tool? Because you said it wouldn't be something that just sits on their desk alone because they never use it. So how do you envision them, or have they used this tool?
I appreciate that. So one of the things that I do with kids, other than when I give it to them and I introduce it and we go through it, is that I will often refer back to it. Like, well, what does it say in organization? Okay, well, where is the information? We do a lot with test prep, and that's the kind of things kids go great and then they forget. Well, let's go back. Let's find in here, what does it have to do with test prep? So it becomes a very simple way to go and to find it and to reread the information. Because we know when we want to change a behavior, we want to learn. We're talking about hundreds of times of touching base with things. We all know what to do, right? Like if we say, like, how do you lose weight or how do you get a healthier body? We all know the right answers. Do we do it? So, but with reminders like, did you set a time for exercise? Did you make sure that you made a homemade meal rather than ordering out? That helps. So it's the same thing with executive functioning. Did you look back? What does it say for taking a test? So teaching the kids how to go through it and then reminding them, practicing, like, go ahead and look at note taking skills. What does that remind you to do? Oh, yeah, I got to put a summary after I have a class that day. Yes. So let's make sure you do that now.
And so that would be an example of one of the tools, that note-taking, creating a summary. And it sounds like that would cue students to engage in that activity. It's not just about taking notes during class, but then you want to summarize that information, which helps you to organize the information.
Correct. All of the tools in this book are all about cueing. I think just to hand this off to a kid and say, here you go, now follow up's not going to happen. But for a parent to go through this, or an educator to go through this, or specialist to go through, and then you can cue them. And once you've gone through it, you can say, well, hang on, go find the note-taking page. I think it's 15 pages. Let's see, I don't even know how long my book is. 17 pages. Go find the note-taking page. And when a kid has something and it's in their repertoire, when they look back and they go, oh, yeah. So I call that the oh, yeah moment. So I teach, for instance, I'll say, look back before you go forward. So my second run might be a little bit different than first. And I say, the minute you look back at a chapter, you go, oh, yeah, that was about, boom, you're ready to move forward. So the minute they can look at the reading comprehension page, you go, oh, yeah, I need to do this. They're integrating that skill.
Mm-hmm. And so these are tools to improve some of those skills that you've mentioned. How do you glean the most from that passage in terms of reading comprehension? How do you take better notes? Because it's not enough to just say, oh, you're a bad note taker, or you need a lot of support around note taking. You have to actually help them to take better notes. And then they have to also know the reason behind the note-taking method that you're using, how that would be helpful.
So we're covering stuff like time management, organization, reading comprehension, studying for tests, written expression or writing. And what I really do feel passionate about is self-regulation, because that's a part of executive functioning. Like, you can't do great if you're in a miserable mood. So best you take some time, do some breathing, some intentional breathing, get a cup of tea, take a little walk around, and get your mind into your thoughtful brain where you're ready to learn. So that is just as important with executive functioning. And I put some reminders in there too, like, where is your brain state? So if you're a learner and you're going, I can't, and you're thinking about the friend that left you out or the other friends that are texting, but they say it's not about you, you're not ready to learn. So sometimes it's like, whoa, let's get in our brain where we're ready to learn, and then we can access information.
And that self-regulation piece is often, overlooked when we're thinking about executive functioning. There's so much focus on the planning and the organization and time management, but that piece that you just mentioned, that self-regulation, is such an important piece, because you can't get to planning or organizing if you have, fear, which you can't regulate, anxiety, which you can't control, or worrying or anger.
100%. And when you think back to, how does a client or a family get to you, they don't usually get to you saying the following: well, everything is really great, we just want a few tools along the way. They come to you because of overwhelm, because of stress. So they're coming for a self-regulation issue. And in order to address that, again, you've got to out it, you've got to name it, you got to have a plan to deal with it. And that's my way of sort of looking at things in general. And then you can get into all the tools.
And one of the things that I love about your work is that you're not only supporting students, you're helping parents and their kids, and you're also helping even experienced educators better understand the struggles of many of the students that we work with. And you give them tools to help them better support children and adolescents. And I think that your background as an educator also plays a role in that. In psychology, you have a psychology background like myself.
Look, every specialist works their own way, and some people specialize in one thing versus the other. To me, it's all about a collaborative approach. And I am not shy about sending an email to parents or sending an email to educators. I often do. And I've had really great responses. And often with an educator, I'll say, here's what I've done. Just want to get a sense of what the kid's doing. And what are you seeing? Anything I can help with? And making a collaborative moment or bringing that educator in where they don't feel like, oh God, she's going to tell me what to do. Because I don't want to do that. Educators know what they're doing. They really know what they're doing. If you honor that, if you say to them, how can I help you? You're going to get much more openness. And at that point, if they say, can you go over this grammar sheet? He didn't get it. Or I had an educator say, totally didn't get how to write the paragraph. Great. I went over it with the kid. I said, I went over it with the kid. By the way, I'm wondering if you can do blank. Then you have a relationship. Because whenever you want to really make things better, you got to be in relationship. And with kids, you cannot just be in relationship with kids. I love the kids. But if I just stay at the kid level, we're not going to make a difference. So the parents and the educators, and by the way, that often there's babysitters or mom's helpers or tutors. I also am in contact, depending on the family. If that babysitter is there every day from 3 to 6, I want that person part of the plan.
And that collaboration is so important, especially now when we're talking about, again, this mid-year slump. It seems like it would also be a good opportunity and a good time for parents to reach out to teachers, to kind of understand the expectations, to share the struggles their child might be experiencing with that transition back to school, and collaboratively coming up with a plan to support that child.
100%. So we are walking into, I probably more next week, 6 weeks past winter break, right? So by now, anything related to just, oh, I was kind of miserable, we came back to break, that's over. 6 weeks of learning that has been fairly uninterrupted. Okay, maybe a little more interrupted. And it's important to acknowledge, like you and I were chatting about ahead of time, I'm not 100% sure. I mean, again, I work with kids all over the country in lots of schools, but I always look for themes along the way. I'm not 100% sure what the expectations are this year, because I think a lot of people are doing the best that they can. And that does not mean they're not teaching, they are. But I think nobody is where they expect to be that they were 5 years ago, meaning it hasn't worked that way. Teachers have been out, kids have been out, school districts have closed down for a couple of days to get all the illness out and try and restart the year. But the pace at which curriculum is explored, the pace at which homework is given, the pace at which kids are expected to learn, that has increased. The slope may not be as big, but that's there. So if there aren't parent-teacher conferences yet, I wouldn't wait till March or late March. I don't think they're going to be past March in most schools, to get a quick check-in and reach out, whether it's your specialist or you as a parent or you as an educator saying to a family, here's where he is. I don't have to wait for a problem. You don't have to wait for low grades. You can just say, where's he at? Where do you want to be? What do I need to get him or her there?
That is brilliant. And I say that because you mentioned the disruptions, and there have been a lot of them. Like you said, some school districts closed for 2 weeks after the winter break. Some kids transitioned to remote learning. Some kids didn't have any. I've had talked to folks on the East Coast who said there have been snow days. And so I think when you talk about communicating with educators, it's important for parents to describe to your child's teacher how those disruptions have impacted them, so that the teacher can, maybe adjust some expectations if that's appropriate for this particular child, or provide additional support that might be needed because of the disruptions.
100%. So a lot of what's going on is about communication. And that's where things start, right? Where is the communication? Is everyone clear on what needs to be done? Because I'm still finding, this could be a whole podcast in of itself, and I'm doing a little background research. I'm still finding, particularly with diverse learners, tech issues, having difficulty interacting with technology and all the platforms and all the programs and even the keyboarding. And I'm about to write a blog on that that there's this assumption that everybody knows what to do, and they don't, right? They don't always know how to use Flipgrid or Pear Deck or whatever. We think they do. We think they can get on Zoom. We think they can share a screen, but they can't always. And I think there's this assumption where sometimes we need to teach, and that includes keyboarding. So that's also an area to reflect back on. Kids went back to school, and some stayed all digital. Some were introduced back to notebooks and paper and pencil. And there was this big gap in time where nothing made sense. So all that needs to go. And you're going to know now if that was, okay, we just got it, or there needs to be some work done in those areas as well.
And so what I'm hearing is that, we have to acknowledge that we're in this mid-year slump. We have to pay attention to what the expectations are, understand what those expectations are, have a plan to support kids, and then communication being really key. Communicating with your child, communicating with your partner about how you're both going to support your child or your children, and then communicating with educators on the best way to support your child, and also providing information on how your child is dealing with this mid-year slump period.
100%. And I'll share this tidbit that I think is important. When you communicate with teachers and with parents, it's important to communicate with your child. Why? Part of executive functioning is self-advocacy skills. So communication models for children how to be a good self-advocate. And isn't that what we want? We want kids to be able to say, teacher, I didn't understand problems 2 through 4, right? Or I read this passage and I really don't understand what it means. So communication is vital.
I love that. Michelle, thank you so much for speaking with us today. Thanks for being such a valuable member of the Child Nexus community. Now, how can listeners get your pocket guide or your big book of tools? What is the best way for them to contact you and get access to that information?
Great. Well, again, thank you so much for having me. This group is invaluable to us as educators, and I believe for parents as well. So I do have a website. People are welcome to visit my website. It's michelleporjes.org. You can certainly message me on there. I made the pocket guide and the big book of tools affordable for people, and I'm happy to do it there. You're also welcome to email me directly at mporjes@gmail.com, mporjes@gmail.com. And I would be delighted to engage in a conversation, to tell you more about how to purchase the materials, and to help out any way I can.
Wonderful. And I will be sure to put that information in the show notes. Thanks again, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.